My mom barked, "Your sister's wedding comes first, so hand over your honeymoon money and stop being selfish." I held up the transfer screenshot and said, "Already moved it. The bank rep heard you threaten me on speaker." That day started like a normal Tuesday, which was probably part of why it hit me so hard. I was standing in the frozen food aisle of the grocery store after my shift, staring at a bag of dumplings I did not actually want, when my phone lit up with my mom's name. I almost ignored it. That was the first warning sign because my mom never called without a reason anymore. She only called when she wanted something, needed something, or was already halfway into a problem she expected me to solve. I answered because I had been trained for years to answer. At first, her voice sounded tight and impatient, the way it always did when she had decided I was already being difficult. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask whether I was busy. She went straight into my sister's wedding and how the final venue payment had come due sooner than expected. I remember standing there between the freezer doors and listening while a little child in a superhero hoodie dragged a cart past me and looked at me like I was in the way. My mom said there was no room left in the budget. She said the florist had overcharged them. She said the photographer wanted the final installment early. She said my sister was already stressed enough without the venue threatening to cancel. Then she said the part that made my stomach go cold. She said my sister's wedding came first, so I needed to hand over my honeymoon money and stop being selfish. For a second, I actually thought I had misheard her. Not because the words were unclear, because they were so absurd that my brain tried to reject them on the spot. My wife and I had spent almost 2 years saving for that honeymoon. We had pushed it back once after an emergency car repair. We had pushed it back again when my wife had to replace a laptop for work. Then we had finally booked it 6 weeks earlier, and even then we had stretched ourselves to do it. We were not rich. We were not even especially comfortable. We were just careful. Every bonus, every side job, every little refund went into that account. The idea that my mom could look at that money and treat it like spare change for my sister's wedding was so far past insulting that I honestly did not have a word for it. I told her no, not calmly in some heroic way, just a simple no. She acted like I had attacked her. She said I was acting like a child. She said family helped family. She said my sister only got married once, like that was supposed to unlock my wallet. I kept my voice level and told her the honeymoon money was already allocated. I said we had deposits down. I said the trip was non-refundable in parts. I said we could not just erase our own plans because the wedding budget had gotten out of control. That was when her tone changed from annoyed to outright nasty. She told me my sister had spent months planning this, and I was trying to ruin it out of spite. She said my wife had probably put me up to being difficult. She said I always got weird about money whenever the family needed something. That last part hit a nerve because it was also the most dishonest thing she could have said. I had spent most of my adult life being the person who did not get weird about money. I was the one who covered the dinner bill when my dad forgot his wallet. I was the one who paid for my brother-in-law's tire when he came up short. I was the one who bought the extra groceries for holidays because everyone else always forgot something. The reason I got careful about money was because every time I was generous, somebody in my family decided it meant I was available. I was still standing there with the freezer door humming beside me when my mom said my sister's wedding came first again, louder this time, as if repeating it was the same thing as making it true. I told her it did not come first to me. I told her my marriage came first to me. I told her my wife came first to me. That was when she barked into the phone and told me to stop acting like I was choosing strangers over blood. I probably should have ended the call right then. Instead, I kept listening, because part of me still thought this was a bad emotional moment and not the opening of a much uglier problem. I had no idea yet that my mom had already told at least 3 people I had agreed to help. I had no idea she had inserted my name into a wedding spreadsheet without asking me. I had no idea she had already promised money that was not hers to promise. And I definitely had no idea I was about to spend the next several weeks learning exactly how far she was willing to go to make my refusal look like betrayal. My wife, Lena, was the first person who told me I was underreacting. She said it after I got home and tried to explain the call while she was chopping onions for dinner. She stopped halfway through the story, wiped her hands on a towel, and asked me to repeat the part where my mother demanded our honeymoon money. When I said it out loud in a normal voice, it sounded even worse. Lena did not get dramatic. That was one of the reasons I married her. She had a very steady way of looking at things that made my family's chaos feel even more ridiculous by contrast. She asked whether I had ever told my mom the exact amount in the honeymoon fund. I said yes, because months earlier I had made the mistake of mentioning we were almost ready to book. She asked whether my sister knew the money existed. I said probably not directly, but my mom definitely knew. She asked whether I had replied in writing. I said no because the call had caught me in the middle of the grocery store and I had not been thinking like a person preparing for a dispute. Then she told me to start thinking that way now. At first, that sounded overcautious. Then I looked at my phone and saw that my mom had already texted me 3 times. The messages were shorter than her voice had been. That somehow made them worse. She said I was making my sister cry. She said the wedding planner was waiting on an answer. She said everyone was counting on me to do the right thing. Lena read them over my shoulder and immediately told me to save screenshots. I did, not because I wanted to win something, because by that point I had learned the hard way that my family liked to rewrite conversations after they happened. If I did not keep records, I might as well have been arguing with fog. I checked the wedding group chat next. I was not in it, but my aunt had sent me a screenshot of something my mother had posted there, which was weird enough that I opened it immediately. My mom had written that I was probably just under a lot of stress from work and that she was sure I would come through once I calmed down. Not that I had agreed, not that she had asked, just that I would come through. It was such a neat little lie that for a moment I just stared at the screen. That was the moment I understood this was not a misunderstanding. This was a setup. I called my sister. I almost did not because I was already tired of being the buffer between her and my mother, but I needed to know whether she actually thought I had promised money. She answered sounding anxious and apologetic before I even said my name. That told me enough. She did not know the full story, but she knew a story had been told. She said Mom had mentioned I was helping with the last payment. She said she thought I had offered some money after all the advice and calls and pressure. She said she was sorry if I was being cornered and that she never wanted me to feel forced. That was the first real crack in the whole thing, because my sister was not evil. She was just the easier target. She had spent her whole life learning that Mom spoke for everyone, so she tended to believe Mom when it sounded convenient. I told her I had never agreed to pay for the wedding. I told her I had never promised the honeymoon fund. I told her Mom had demanded it from me on the phone while acting like it was already settled. My sister sounded shocked, then embarrassed, then defensive in the way people get when they realize they have benefited from a lie without meaning to. She said she would talk to Mom. I told her not to bother until she knew exactly what was going on. Then I hung up and sat at the kitchen table with my phone in my hand. While Lena waited for the rest of the story, I did not have yet. My mother had spent years making me the family problem solver. I did not see that clearly until later. At the time, it just felt like I was always the one who could be counted on to smooth things over. I was the one who figured out the deposit when Dad's retirement check came in late. I was the one who covered the gas when my younger brother lost his card. I was the one who told everybody not to make a scene when somebody forgot a birthday or a holiday or some other obligation that turned into a full-day crisis. The thing people forget about being the reliable one is that it can become a trap. If you never say no loudly enough, people start mistaking your silence for consent. That had happened with little stuff first. Then medium stuff. Then money. Always money. When I was 27, my mom had borrowed from me to help with a water heater. She repaid part of it. When I was 30, she needed help with rent after an argument with my father. I covered the first month and never got the second month back. When my sister needed braces for her son, I helped because my mom said it was temporary. Every time, I told myself this was what families did. Every time, I told myself there was no point in making a war out of a debt that would eventually get paid. The problem was that eventually never seemed to arrive when the money went the other way. Lena knew most of this because we had been together long enough for the stories to come out one by one. She also knew that I was done pretending my family had normal boundaries. She asked me whether I wanted to keep the money visible in the account or move it. I asked her what she meant. She said my mother clearly believed the honeymoon fund was a soft target. If anyone at the bank or on the transfer side could tell her exactly where it sat, she would keep trying to reach it through guilt, pressure, and whoever else she could recruit. Lena suggested opening a separate account at a different bank with only us on it. Not a dramatic hide-the-money move, just a clean, boring financial boundary. I liked that because it felt practical instead of theatrical. I spent the next hour doing exactly that. I moved the honeymoon savings into a new high-yield account under both our names. I turned off overdraft access. I removed the debit card link. I made sure nothing was visible on the old app except the transfer history. I saved screenshots of every step. I know that sounds paranoid when I write it now. It did not feel paranoid at the time. It felt like finally putting a lock on a door that had been standing open for too long. The transfer went through in a couple of stages because the original account and the new one were at different institutions. The process itself was painfully boring. That was one of the best things about it. No fireworks, no drama, just dates, numbers, confirmations, and a new balance sitting in a safer place than the one my mother believed she could order me to empty. While I was waiting for the final transfer confirmation, my phone rang again. Same number. I should have let it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered, and because I was already on hold with the bank's customer service line to verify one of the transfer steps, I ended up with the bank representative still connected in the background. I remember that clearly because I had one of those little earbuds in, and I had been pacing the hallway while listening to a very polite woman explain routing times. When my mother started yelling, I hit speaker without thinking, mostly because my hands were full and I needed to deal with her quickly. She got louder as soon as she heard I was on speaker. I do not think she realized there was anyone else on the line at first. She told me I was embarrassing the family. She told me I was acting like the wedding was a joke. She told me I would regret making her choose sides. Then she said she would tell everyone I had stolen from my sister if I kept refusing. That was the exact moment the bank rep heard her clearly enough to ask very carefully if everything was all right on my end. I wish I could say I felt dramatic. I mostly felt cold. My mom heard the rep's voice and immediately started talking over both of us. That only made it worse for her. I kept my tone level and asked the rep to hold while I handled a family matter. Then I told my mother that she needed to stop threatening me. She said she was not threatening me, she was warning me. I asked her whether warning me that she would accuse me of theft counted as a warning. She swore and said I had made everything impossible. I told the bank rep that I wanted the call documented because a third party had just overheard a threat involving money and account pressure. The rep did not sound shocked, which somehow made me feel even more justified. She asked whether I wanted a note added to my file. I said yes. She asked whether I wanted to verify that no one else had access to the account. I said yes again. Then I put my mother back on the line long enough for her to hear me say the account had already been moved and secured. That was when she told me I was dead to her if I made my sister look bad. I did not say anything clever back. I simply ended the call. The screenshots were already saved. The transfer was already complete. And now there was a bank record that a rep had heard my mom threaten me over the phone while I was actively trying to protect my own money. I sat there for a minute after hanging up, just staring at the wall. Lena came over and took the phone from my hand. She did not ask whether I was okay in the performative way people do when they expect you to say yes. She just sat beside me and asked whether I wanted water or to call my dad. I said water first, then I called my dad because I knew if I did not tell him what was happening, my mother would probably do it with enough spin to make me sound like some kind of monster. Dad answered on the second ring and sounded tired in the way he always did when Mom was already somewhere in the conversation. I told him the facts. I told him Mom had demanded our honeymoon money. I told him she had already told people I agreed. I told him she had threatened to accuse me of stealing from my sister. I told him the bank rep had heard it. He was quiet long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said he did not know she had pushed it that far. That told me everything I needed to know about how much he had known and how little he had done. He said he would talk to her. I said she already knew my answer. Then I told him I was done being the emergency fund for this family. He did not argue. That was almost more upsetting than if he had. The next 2 days were a blur of texts, calls, and small discoveries that kept making the situation uglier. My aunt texted me asking why I was backing out of helping my sister after I had apparently volunteered. A cousin I barely spoke to sent me a passive-aggressive message about being blessed enough to help family. An old family friend left a voicemail that sounded like it had been coached by my mom. Apparently the story now was that I had promised to cover the final wedding payment and then changed my mind after the venue deadline. No one seemed to question how my mother had known to say that before I even spoke to most of them. That was the part that finally made me angry enough to dig. I asked my sister for the wedding planning spreadsheet. Not because I thought she had done something wrong, because I knew she had the Google Docs link and I wanted the actual timeline. She hesitated, then sent it. I opened it and nearly laughed from disbelief. Under budget items, there was a line my mother had added with my and Lena's names next to the honeymoon money amount. Not in the original budget notes, not as a question, as if it were already allocated. There was also a separate comment thread where my mother had written that I would sort it out after payday. I had never seen that document before. Neither had Lena. Neither had my sister, according to her when I called her back. That was the moment I knew my mother had been operating on a level of confidence that came from assuming I would not check. That kind of thing works on people who avoid paperwork. It does not work well on someone who spends his adult life getting bills and bank statements in order because he hates being surprised by money. I sent the spreadsheet to myself. I sent the screenshots to Lena. I saved them in a folder labeled with the date. Then I called my sister again and read her the section my mother had added. She got very quiet. Then she said she had not put that there. Then she said she thought Mom must have been updating the budget for her. Then she said she needed to sit down. That was when I realized my sister had not actually been the main villain in this. She had been part of the machinery, sure. She had let Mom drive the car, but she had not built the engine. My mother had. Over the years, Mom had trained my sister to see her as the person keeping everyone connected. The truth was uglier. She was the one deciding who knew what. That gave her the power to play us against each other while acting like the exhausted victim in the middle. I started remembering old things differently after that. A birthday dinner where I had been told my sister had already cleared a time, and she later swore she had never been asked. A holiday where Mom said I was the only one who could help with a bill, and Dad later admitted he had offered. A family emergency fund that somehow never existed when I needed one. It all looked different once I saw the pattern. The pattern was always the same. My mother would decide what she needed. Then she would tell the version of the truth most likely to get it. When that failed, she would tell everybody I was the problem. My wife watched me go through all this and kept asking one simple question. What do you want to happen now? I did not have a big answer for her. I was too busy realizing how much of my life had been spent trying to manage other people's expectations. I said I wanted the wedding to happen without my money. I said I wanted the lies to stop. I said I wanted my mom to stop using my name like it was a shared resource. Lena nodded and said that was enough for now. She reminded me that I did not need to prove I was a good son by being a bad husband. That line stayed with me because it named exactly what had been happening. I had spent years trying to be good to my family in a way that made me less good to my own life. The week before the wedding, my mother called my office line. That was not normal. My work number was not something she used unless she wanted to make a point. I was in a break room heating up soup when the receptionist transferred her. She started in with the same guilt routine, only this time she was calmer and sharper. She said the venue needed final confirmation. She said my sister was crying every night. She said my dad was worried the whole family would look cheap if the balance was not covered. Then she said she had been trying to protect me from getting blamed. That sentence was almost funny. She had set the blame on fire herself. I told her again that the money was moved and she was not getting it. She said she knew that because she had already told my sister I was backing out. She said if I did not fix it, the entire family would know I had let my sister's wedding collapse. I asked her why the wedding collapsing would be my fault when she was the one who had promised money that was never hers. She did not answer that. Instead, she said I was choosing a honeymoon over family. I told her I was choosing not to be manipulated. She said she had no idea where I got such a cruel attitude. I said from years of watching her act like other people's money was a family fund. Then I ended the call. After that, I stopped answering her directly. I put everything in writing. Every text got a short answer. Every call got redirected to voicemail. If she wanted something, she had to say it where I could screenshot it. That annoyed her more than yelling ever had. People like my mother can use emotional chaos like a fog machine. They hate it when you force them into daylight. 2 days before the wedding, my sister asked if I would meet her for coffee. I almost said no because I was tired and a little insulted, but I went anyway. She looked wrecked, not in a theatrical way, in a real one. Tired eyes, dry lips, wrinkled shirt, the whole thing. She told me she had finally gone through the spreadsheet herself and realized Mom had been telling her the wedding was short by my honeymoon amount for at least a week. She said she thought I had volunteered because Mom had framed it as a gift from us. She said she had not wanted to pressure me and that she was sorry for that. Then she told me the part that changed how I felt about her. She said Mom had already told her not to mention anything to me because I would only get defensive if I heard there was a gap. That was classic Mom. Always filtering the facts to the people she thought she could control. My sister looked embarrassed to be there, and I believed she was. She admitted Mom had a habit of telling her she could handle things herself and then rewriting the story later. She said she had started to notice it more after she got engaged, but she kept assuming Mom was just stressed. I told her stress did not explain lying about my money. She agreed. Then she asked whether I would come to the wedding at all. I said yes, if only because I was not going to miss my sister's wedding just because my mother had chosen to turn it into a hostage situation. She cried then, which made me feel both guilty and stubborn at the same time. I did not hug her right away. That was another thing I had to admit I had gotten wrong. I waited too long to believe my sister was also being managed. I had spent so many years resenting how close she seemed to be to Mom that I did not fully see she had been raised inside the same system. She had not been my enemy. She had been one of the people caught in the machine. That did not erase everything, but it mattered. The rehearsal dinner was where things blew up in front of everyone. My mom had always loved events where people had to wear nice clothes and stay seated. It gave her an audience. The dinner was at a restaurant not far from the venue, and the room had that awkward air all family gatherings get when everyone knows they are one comment away from a disaster. I arrived with Lena and kept my head down. Mom gave me a look that made it obvious she wanted me to apologize first. I did not. She spent the first hour making small, pointed remarks to relatives about how some people did not understand how much work weddings took. Then she got louder. She said it was a shame when one sibling could not be counted on. She said she had never imagined I would make my sister cry before the big day. A few people looked over at me. I remember the heat in my face more than the actual words. I did not argue. I waited. My sister was sitting 3 chairs away from Mom and looked like she wanted the floor to open. My dad was staring at his plate. My aunt was pretending not to listen while obviously listening. Then Mom said very clearly that I had backed out of paying the venue balance and left everyone scrambling. That was when I took out my phone and opened the screenshot folder. I did not stand up dramatically. I just turned the screen toward the table. I showed the transfer confirmation. I showed the date. I showed the timestamp from the bank. I showed the note from the rep that the account had been moved after a call in which a family member had threatened me over speakerphone. The room got very quiet. Mom looked at the screen and then at me and tried to say the screenshots did not mean what I thought they meant. That was almost impressive in its desperation. I said the transfer had been made before her call demanding the money. I said the honeymoon fund was moved to a separate account because I did not trust her not to keep pushing. I said she had already promised the money to other people without asking me. Then I showed the spreadsheet. That made a few heads turn. One cousin actually said my mother had put my name on that document herself. My mom went pale in the way people do when they realize the paper trail is no longer on their side. She tried to pivot and said she had only been trying to help the family budget. I said she had been trying to assign money she did not have authority over. Then my sister, who had been shaking the whole time, asked Mom if she had really told everyone I had agreed. That was the first time I saw my mother lose control in a room full of witnesses. She tried to answer with more guilt and less truth. She said she was just desperate. She said the wedding was important. She said I was making her sound like a thief. I did not say thief. I did not need to. The table had already gotten there on its own. My aunt asked, with the kind of icy politeness only family can manage, whether Mom had been moving money around in the spreadsheet without permission. My father finally looked up. That mattered more than I expected. He did not defend me exactly. He just said he did not know about the honeymoon fund being presented as available money. That tiny sentence was basically a public admission that my mother had been freelancing with the truth. My mom started to cry then, but it did not land the way she wanted. It was too late. The room had already seen the screenshots. The room had already seen that a bank rep had heard the threat. The room had already heard my sister confirm that she had been told a different version. Once all of that was out, the emotional leverage disappeared. That was the strangest part. I had expected a screaming match. Instead, I got something much more valuable. I got witnesses. People who had been told I was unreliable were suddenly watching the evidence in real time. Nobody had to take my word for it anymore. My mother tried to salvage things by saying she never meant for it to go this far. I pointed out that she had still said it. I said she had still told people I agreed. I said she had still used my name in a budget line. I said she had still threatened to accuse me of theft when I refused. That was when my dad finally stood up and told her to stop talking. It was the first time I had ever heard him do that to her in public. It did not make him a hero. It made him late, but it mattered. My sister left the table in tears, and I followed her outside because that was the first thing I could do that did not make the situation worse. She was upset, but not at me anymore. Mostly she was mortified. She said she had no idea Mom had gone that far. She said the venue payment had already been covered by her and her fiancé after some last-minute rearranging, and that they could have handled it if they had known earlier. That made me even angrier on her behalf. My mother had turned a solvable budgeting issue into a family moral crisis just to get pressure on me. She had done it because it worked better to frame me as the obstacle than to admit she had overpromised. The wedding still happened the next day. I went. Lena went with me. I kept my distance from my mother and gave my sister a genuine hug before the ceremony. She looked relieved when she saw I was still there. That probably hurt me more than anything else because it meant she had really believed I might not come. The ceremony itself was nice enough. That was the weirdest part. It is hard to describe how normal a wedding can look after a family explosion. People laughed. People took photos. People cried at the vows. Kids ran around the reception hall while servers brought out plates of chicken and potatoes. If you had walked in blind, you would never have known half the family had spent the previous night looking at screenshots like they were evidence in a trial. My mother stayed brittle and quiet. She barely spoke to me. A few relatives kept giving me the sideways look people reserve for someone they are not sure they should have judged so quickly. I did not care. That felt new and useful. I had spent most of my life caring too much about whether people were disappointed in me. This time I was mostly aware that I had done the right thing and had proof. The bank rep never became a main character in the story, obviously. But I did follow up the next morning because I wanted a written confirmation of the call note. I got a generic email summarizing the transfer and noting that all account activity remained authorized by me. It did not mention my mother by name. It did not need to. The timestamp was enough. The bank had also flagged the account for extra security, which meant any future attempt to access or discuss it without me would require added verification. I loved that little detail more than I should have. It was not revenge. It was a lock. That was all I wanted. A lock. The real consequence came a few days later when my mother realized she could not keep telling the story the way she had been. Too many people had seen the screenshots. Too many people had heard the spreadsheet story. Too many people knew the venue had been paid without my money and that she had lied about my agreement. At first, she tried to minimize it. Then she tried to say I had embarrassed her in public. Then she tried the oldest trick in her book and told people I had always been difficult with money. But the problem with repeating a lie after receipts exist is that it starts to sound like a tantrum. My aunt stopped returning her calls. One cousin told me privately that Mom had been asking people to chip in after already promising I would cover things. My dad stayed unusually quiet for a while, which I think was his way of dealing with the mess without picking a fight he had avoided for decades. My sister was the one who changed the most. She did not cut Mom off. Neither did I. But she stopped letting Mom control the wedding photos, the thank you notes, and every tiny detail the way she had before. I think once she saw what Mom was willing to do to me, she could not unsee the rest. That was probably the only good thing that came out of it. Lena and I left for our honeymoon 3 days later. It was a simple trip compared to what we had originally dreamed about. We had not booked the luxury version of anything. But it was ours. No relatives, no group chats, no emergency money, no one asking what we could spare. On the flight, I kept looking at the transfer confirmation like it was some ridiculous talisman. Lena eventually told me to put the phone away and enjoy the fact that the money was finally being used for the thing it had been saved for. She was right. We stayed somewhere quiet. We ate too much. We slept late. We walked around like people who had forgotten how much room existed when nobody was trying to move our boundaries around. For the first time in months, I did not wake up wondering who needed what from me. That should not have felt like luxury, but it did. When we got back, I had one more round of family fallout to deal with. My mother tried a final reset by sending me a long message that focused on how hurt she was and how everything had gotten out of hand. There was no apology. There never really was. Just a long emotional wall of text that implied we had both contributed equally to the problem, which was her favorite way of avoiding responsibility. I did not argue. I replied once. I said I was willing to have a relationship again when she stopped making promises with my money and stopped threatening me when I said no. That was it. No rant, no lecture, no revenge fantasy, just terms. She did not like that, obviously. But that was the point. I was no longer asking her to like it. A few weeks later, my sister sent me a thank you note for attending the wedding and for not letting things get uglier than they already were. That note meant more to me than I expected. It was not an apology for everything. It was not some magical family healing moment. It was just a small sign that she had finally understood how badly Mom had twisted the whole situation. My dad called around the same time and admitted in his quiet way that I had probably been right to protect the money. He said he should have said something sooner. I told him probably. That was as honest as I could be. We are not a warm family, not really. We are a family that learned how to function around silence and pressure, and whatever old resentments never got named out loud. But after that wedding, the silence changed shape. It was less like denial and more like consequence. People remembered, people adjusted. People stopped assuming I would be the one to absorb the blow. That was the biggest change, not some dramatic apology, not a courtroom, not a grand confession. Just the end of the automatic expectation that my money and my patience belonged to the family by default. I would be lying if I said it made my mom kinder. It did not. It made her more careful, and careful is not the same as changed. But it was enough. It meant she no longer called me to demand things without thinking first about what I might have recorded. It meant she stopped telling relatives I had already agreed to anything unless she was ready for someone to check. It meant the bank account stayed ours. It meant my wife and I got to take the trip we had earned. It meant the story my mother told about me stopped matching the paper trail. That was the real victory. Not that I humiliated her. I did not. Not that I beat her at her own game. I did not want the game. I just refused to play it badly. I stayed calm. I moved the money. I saved the screenshots. I let the bank rep hear exactly what was being said. And when the family finally looked at the facts instead of my mother's version of them, the whole thing collapsed under its own weight. A year later, the topic still comes up at holidays sometimes. usually in the careful way families use when they are pretending not to remember something important. My sister is married now. My mother still behaves like the wedding was saved by chaos and not by everyone else working around her. My father still avoids conflict like it is a hobby he retired from decades ago. And me, I keep my accounts separate, my receipts saved, and my promises small enough that I can actually keep them. I do not think that makes me cynical. I think it makes me harder to bully. That turned out to be a useful thing to learn from my own mother, not because I wanted the lesson, because I had finally run out of ways to pretend I did not need one.